In this video, I'm going to show you how to paint a simple Misty Mountain landscape. I love painting Misty Mountain landscapes because they're very simple, but they look very dramatic and look more complicated than they are to do. Let's get started. For the paint, I'm just using one color, which is black. For my black, I'm using Neutral Tint by Daniel Smith, but you can use any black that you want. If you don't have a black, you can use brown or a blue. For my paper, I'm using 140-pound Arches cold press paper that I tape to a hardboard. For my brushes, I'm using a 1.5 wash brush and a round 12, all by Princeton. All the materials are listed in the description below. We're gonna start with a background layer, which is the Misty and Foggy layer. I'm gonna use the 1.5-inch wash brush, but if you don't have a brush like this, just use the largest brush that you have. So you can use a large brush like this as well, but it's just faster to do it with a wash brush like this. So we're just gonna grab some clean water and just spread it on your paper evenly. So you don't want a whole lot of water where it's puddling. Make sure you don't put too much water on your paper, and if you do, just raise up your paper and let the excess water flow down. You can also blot the excess water with some paper towels. I'm gonna switch to my round 12 brush, and I'm just gonna grab some water and put it on my mixing palette, and I'm just grabbing a little bit of black paint and mixing it in. I want to mix a really light gray, just lots of water and a little bit of black to make a light gray. Just drop it in random areas of your wet paper in round circular motions. The thing about clouds is they don't have any hard edges, so make sure all your edges are nice and soft and circular and not straight and hard edged. Just remember that watercolor dries 1 or 2 shades lighter, especially with a wash where you're starting with water already. So make sure to be aware of that. And you also want to leave some white areas. Keep some areas pretty white and some really dark and maybe some that are medium dark. But you also don't want to go too dark because we just want like a subtle, cloudy, foggy situation. Just taking care to correct any hard lines that happened. Just blending. So when I'm doing washes, I like to go over an area as few times as possible. This keeps your wash fresh because you're not ruining the paper underneath. So I try not to go over the same spot over and over as much as possible. You can kind of do it, but just try to be very delicate because when the paper is wet, it's a lot more delicate. So you just want to be careful that you're not scrubbing in a lot. And you just want to be gentle so you're not scrubbing the paper and ruining the paper. The great thing about watercolor when you're doing clouds or fog is that clouds and fog are basically made out of water. So when you use water on your paper, the water actually already knows how to make those shapes naturally. It's gonna look like clouds or fog very easily because it's made of the same thing, and you just kind of have to let it do its thing. Another thing is just try not to mess with it so much because as it dries, it's gonna settle in. So you don't want to micromanage the paint, just let it do whatever it wants. So for me, that's kind of like what I like to do. I just kind of try to let the water do its thing and just kind of help it along the way, but I just kind of follow the lead of what's happening on the paper, and it turns out much better that way than me like trying to say to the paint, oh, you know, you have to form a formation here or you have to have something here. It's easier to just let it do its thing. We're gonna let this dry completely. You can give it some time, or you can use a heat gun or a hair dryer to speed up the process. And to check if your paper is dry enough, just use the back of your hand and touch it to the paper. If it is cool to the touch, it's not quite dry yet, so make sure it's totally dry. Look at your paper and make sure there are no hard edges or straight lines or anything weird like that. If you find that your background layer doesn't look dark enough for your liking, if it's dry, you can go over it again with clean water and do the whole process again. I personally don't like to do multiple layers because I find the more layers I do, the more mistakes happen. So I just like to try to get it right the first time. But if you did want to darken it, you can do it again. Just make sure your paper is dry first. So for the middle layer, we're gonna do the mountains. For the mountains, we're gonna use a darker black. Just grab your black and you want more paint and less water. It's gonna be a much darker color, but still not quite all the way black. We're still doing like kind of a medium gray. And we're just gonna paint a mountain. When I'm painting mountains, instead of putting my brush like this and drawing it on, I like to put my brush on its side, like parallel to the paper. And I find this way I can get more random brush strokes. And I just kind of roll the brush while I'm pulling it, and that gives me a more organic look. And I'm gonna do the mountain kind of like higher up here and then kind of going lower here. You just want to make sure it's very random. And then I'm gonna rinse my brush and then we're gonna fade this out. Grab some water and kind of fade it out. And this part is just gonna be like faded out into this thing here. I'm just trying to make sure it's not so straight, so I don't want it to be straight. Just fade it out so it kind of blends into the bottom. I'm just going to tilt it so that some of the paint flows down a little bit. So I feel like this is too light, so I'm just going to add a little bit of, I'm going to just drop in, darken that part a bit. So just try not to mess with it too much. We're just going to blend this in so it's not so obvious that that's our edge. I'm also going to add a lighter mountain range here, maybe smaller. So this one is a little bit lighter than the other one, just very subtle. I'm just gonna drop this in because I feel like that's too, it's like a line there that I don't like. You just drop in some color if you want it to be darker a little bit. And you can darken up some areas if you want. Hide that edge there. We're gonna dry this again. Again, make sure it's dry completely. And we're just making sure there are no hard edges again on the bottom of the mountains. And I can see here there's like actually a hard edge because I didn't blend it well enough. So I'm just gonna use a piece of paper towel and just dip it in some water and kind of just blend that in, erase that a little bit, just gently, kind of in round motions, kind of just erase that line that I didn't want. Kind of blend that in. There you go. That's better. Kind of, you can dab also and kind of blend stuff in. Just gently. And here also, like, there's some weird stuff that happened here. Doing this also adds like a foggy atmosphere as well. So I can see here on this side, there's like some hard lines. So I'm just gonna make sure you find a clean spot on your paper towel and just like rub it lightly. Not too much because you're gonna ruin the paper. And just blend. We're gonna do another mountain. Here in the front. And just like a larger mountain. And darker. And then just blend that in. And I'm just making sure it doesn't look too straight or too kind of inorganic. You want it to look natural. And it doesn't have to be like even, super even either. The kind of the variations in value makes it kind of look foggy and cloudy as well. And you can darken up some areas if you want. Again, let that dry completely, and then we're going to take off the tape. And there you have it. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, make sure you subscribe to my channel for more watercolor landscape tutorials for beginners.